Thank you. It appears that political ferment is dormant in the United States. This is incorrect. The neoliberal ideas that sustain the corporate state are swiftly losing their efficacy across the political spectrum. And the ideas that are rising to take their place remain inchoate, as evidenced by the recent midterm elections. The right is retreating into Christian fascism, a celebration of the gun culture, and manipulating a legitimate rage against government, with the exception, of course, of the military and law enforcement, as well as the vulnerable, including Muslims, undocumented workers, liberals, intellectuals, and homosexuals. The left, knocked off balance by decades of fierce state repression in the name of anti-communism, is struggling to rebuild and redefine itself, crippled by its association with a bankrupt and ineffectual liberal elite that has capitulated to corporate power and the demands of the national security state. Popular revulsion for the ruling elites, however, is nearly universal, and it is a question only of which ideas will now capture the public's imagination, and that is why we are here today. Politics, if we take politics to mean the shaping and discussion of issues, concerns, and laws that foster the common good, is no longer the business of our traditional political institutions. We live rather in a system of managed democracy, one where corporate power legitimates itself through elections and courts it controls, as well as a subservient mass media. All purportedly democratic institutions, including the two major political parties, are fundamentally anti-democratic. They are used to crush any vestige of civic life that calls, as a participatory democracy does, on its citizens to share among all its members the power, benefits, sacrifices, and risks of a nation. They offer rather the facade of politics, sustained through elaborate, choreographed, and incredibly expensive spectacles filled with skillfully manipulated emotion and devoid of genuine political content. Pundits and news celebrities on the airwaves engaged in fevered speculation about whether the wife of a former president will run for office, and this after the mediocre son of another president spent 8 years in the White House, and whether or not she will possibly face a nominee who is the brother of one president and the son of another. The capture of political and economic power by a tiny cobble of elites is characteristic of the twilight of all empires, including ancient Rome, where a small group of oligarchic families exchanged power among themselves as civic institutions became a farce and the state disintegrated under mounting repression, corruption, and the folly of endless war. Electioneering in a managed democracy is continuous, partly by making it incredibly banal and boring, and it saturates the airwaves with party-controlled propaganda. Politics, in this sense, has been deformed by corporate money into anti-politics, into a way to demobilize the citizenry rather than engage it. It becomes a way to ignore the vital and important issues that face us, and it turns election contests into choices between manufactured political personalities. The fundamental platform of all major political parties is fear of the other, rather than any genuine alternative to corporate hegemony. Opinion polls, the staple of what serves as political reporting, are not politics. They are forms of social control. The use of billions of dollars to fund election campaigns and pay lobbyists to author legislation is not politics, it is legalized bribery. The insistence that austerity and economic rationality rather than the welfare of the citizenry is the primary concern of government is not politics, it is the death of civic virtue. The government system of wholesale surveillance and the militarization of police forces, along with the psychosis of permanent war and state-orchestrated fear of terrorism, is not politics. It is about eradicating civil liberties and justifying endless war and state repression. The chatter about death panels, gay rights, guns, undocumented children crossing the border is not politics. It is the manipulation by the power elites of emotion, hate, and fear. Power and wealth in this system, one the political philosopher Sheldon Wolin calls inverted totalitarianism, and I just finished an 8-part series that is on the Real News interviewing Wolin, who is, without question, our greatest political philosopher, shut out, by the way, in the 80s when he defied neoliberal economics. Power, he writes, is steadily projected upwards. It is the antithesis of constitutional power. And inverted totalitarianism, while it purports to pay fealty to electoral politics, the Constitution, the 3 branches of government, a free press, the iconography and language of American patriotism, has seized internally all of the levers of power to render the citizen impotent. Now, the old liberal class, once the safety valve that addressed grievances and injustices in times of economic or political distress, the force that rescued capitalism with the New Deal, has been neutered. There are self-identified liberals, including Barack Obama, who continue to speak in the old language of liberalism, something he inherited from Bill Clinton, but assiduously serve corporate interests. Clinton knew that by doing corporate bidding, he would get corporate money, and thus we got NAFTA, the greatest betrayal of the working class in this country since the 1948 Taft-Hartley Act, the destruction of our welfare system, and under the old welfare system, 70% of the recipients were children, the explosion of mass incarceration under the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill, the deregulation of the FCC, turning the airwaves over to a half-dozen corporations, and of course the revoking of FDR's 1933 Glass-Steagall reform that protected our banking system from speculators. Clinton, in exchange, got corporate money, and he transformed the Democratic Party into the Republican Party. This was diabolically brilliant because it forced the Republican Party to shift so far to the right, it became insane. But it also destroyed the last vestiges of a liberal establishment that once made incremental and piecemeal reform possible within the system. By the time Clinton was done, the rhetoric of self-professed liberals was a public relations game. And this is why there has been near total continuity from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. Obama's election did nothing to halt the expanding assault on civil liberties. Indeed, Obama's assault has been worse. And as many of you know, I sued the president in federal court over Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, a case that we initially won and that was appealed by the Obama administration and overturned. Obama has furthered Bush's bailouts of the big banks, the expansion of imperial wars that, of course, are draining the Treasury, has failed to regulate Wall Street, has extended our offshore penal colonies, drawn up kill lists, and uses militarized drone strikes in countries across the globe, whether we have declared war against those countries or not. We have seen corporations continue to write legislation, laws, and regulations, and corporate lobbyists to serve in top government positions within the administration. We have seen the explosion of drilling and fracking, and of course, the security and surveillance apparatus that makes us the most photographed, watched, eavesdropped, and monitored population in human history. And when you are watched 24 hours a day, as everyone in this room is, you cannot use the word liberty. This is the relationship between a master and a slave, and it means the death of investigative journalism into the vast black holes of power. Corporations, freed from all laws, government regulations, internal constraints, are stealing as much as fast as they can on the way down. And the managers of these corporations no longer care about the effects of their pillage. Many indeed expect the system they are looting to fall apart. They are driven by personal greed and hubris, quite content to destroy, as we saw with Lehman Brothers, often the very institutions they control for personal greed. They believe their obscene wealth can buy them security and protection. They should have spent a little less time studying management in business schools and a little more time studying human nature in human history. They are digging not only our graves, but their own. Genuine political activity, the organizing work needed to protect citizens from the abuses of power, exists now only on the margins of our society. Politics in America, in this sense, has gone underground. And because politics is underground, it means a rebuilding, pretty much from scratch, of local systems of participatory democracy and a re-education of what it means to be a citizen. This reinvigoration of citizenship requires more than a civics lesson. As Wolin writes, it necessitates a reordering of basic power arrangements and a different understanding of civic commitments from that of a spectator. Participatory democracy will start by establishing groups that stand in defiance of established systems of power. It will begin with very personal and radical choices, define the animal agricultural business, which is one or two in terms of top causes of global warming. By eating a plant-based diet would be one, and building local systems of direct democracy that seek to reclaim power over our own lives and our communities. None of the groups that stand on the front lines of economic, racial, and environmental distress are allied with a mainstream party or movement, including most of the big NGOs. Their voices are not heard on any of the major broadcast networks or in the mainstream press. They have little financial support, and their activists know that jail time comes with a job description. Any engagement in the actual political life of the nation will be through these groups. To invest energy and money in what the state defines as politics, including presidential campaigns, is a waste of time. This is a battle fundamentally about ideas. And as Helena said, the recovery of the sacred, the understanding that life has an intrinsic value that overrides monetary value. As long as most citizens can be made to believe in the neoliberal ideas that justify global capitalism, relentless austerity, the private and state institutions under corporate control will remain unassailable. When these ideas are shattered, when they are exposed as a vast con game, the institutions that buttress the ruling elite will deflate and collapse. And this battle of ideas is what is percolating below the surface of American society and across the globe. It is a battle the corporate state is steadily losing. An increasing number of people are getting it. They know they have been stripped of political power. They recognize they have been shorn of basic and cherished civil liberties. They see they are under the constant gaze of the state. With half the country living in poverty, or a category called near poverty, and none of us now recognizing that we can recover the types of union jobs that made life within the working class sustainable, there is a recognition that the future promises, for most, at best stagnation, and for many, distress. The corporate state, unable to respond rationally to the economic and ecological crisis, exists to turn human beings in the natural world into disposable commodities. It exists to extract greater and greater profit, even if that means despoiling the planet and impoverishing workers around the globe. The corporate state, abandoning the poor, seeks to get us to believe in our own personal agency through the spectacle of this anti-politics that they sustain. As long as we, as participants, believe in this lie of the empty political theater that we have just watched, our corporate oligarchs will rest easy in their private jets, their boardrooms, their penthouses, and their mansions. But as the bankruptcy of neoliberal economics is exposed, the ruling elite will become increasingly nervous, for they know that if the ideas that justify their pillage are discredited, they are finished. And this is why voices of dissent, as well as spontaneous uprisings such as the Occupy movement, are ruthlessly crushed by the corporate state or pushed to the margins of society. When the corporate state is unable to render a population passive through propaganda, it does through coercion. Courts, especially since 9/11, have overturned our most cherished constitutional rights, including due process, by judicial fiat, and our police have been militarized, and all of us are under the gaze of Big Brother. Now, revolts erupt, and I've covered many of them around the world as a foreign correspondent, over incidents that would, in normal circumstances, be considered trivial. But once the tinder of revolt has piled up, as it has here in the United States and many states of Europe and around the globe, an insignificant spark ignites popular rebellion. No person or movement can ignite this tinder. No one knows where or when the eruption will take place. No one knows the form it will take. But it is certain, given the surrender of political and economic power to corporations, that a popular revolt of one form or another is coming. The refusal by the corporate state to address even the minimal grievances of citizens, the chronic unemployment and underemployment, the massive debt peonage that is crippling half of the American public, the loss of hope, the widespread despair, means that blowback is inevitable. Revolts, when they occur, appear to the elites and the establishment to be sudden and unexpected, but this is because the ferment, the discrediting of systems of authority, is unseen by the mainstream society. Throughout history, those who have sought radical change have always had to first discredit the ideas used to prop up ruling elites and construct alternative ideas and visions for society. And they have done this far from the centers of power, as is being done now in local cooperatives and fringe movements that are largely ignored or dismissed by the state. Any uprising that is devoid of ideas and vision is never a threat to the ruling elites. Social upheaval without clear definition and direction, without ideas behind it, descends into nihilism, random violence, and chaos. It consumes itself. By the time the ruling elites are openly defied, there has been a near total loss of faith in the ideas, in this case, neoliberal economics and globalization, that sustain the structures of power. And once enough people get it, a process that can take years, as Alexander Berkman wrote, the slow, quiet, and peaceful social evolution that is unseen by the mainstream society becomes quick, militant, and violent. And this is where we were headed. I do not say this because I am a supporter of revolt or revolution. I am not. I prefer the gradual reforms of a functioning democracy. I prefer a system in which our social institutions permit the citizenry to nonviolently dismiss those in authority. I prefer a system in which institutions are independent and not captive to corporate power. But we do not live in such a system. Revolt will be characterized by sustained mass acts of civil disobedience spawned by small, localized cells of resistance that have created for themselves some form of autonomy. And this is the only option left. The ruling elites, once the ideas that justify their existence are discredited throughout the society will, as all ruling elites have done in the past, resort to force in their final clutch at power. If a nonviolent popular movement is able to ideologically disarm the bureaucrats, civil servants, and police to get them, in essence, to defect, nonviolent revolution is possible. But if the state can organize effective and prolonged violence against dissent, it may spawn reactive revolutionary violence, or what the state calls terrorism. Much lies beyond our control. The looming ecological and financial collapse, the rage that has been successfully captured by proto-fascist movements such as the Tea Party, the Christian Right, and the lunatic fringe of the Republican Party. The transformation of law enforcement and courts into instruments of repression, and the degeneration of our financial and political institutions into lawless enterprises could see many in disgust and anger call not for an open society, but a strong authoritarian state that will permit corporate totalitarianism to become more naked and overt. There is no guarantee that what lies ahead will be pleasant or easy. But the sooner we engage with this reality, the sooner we confront the real systems of power, the more effective we will be in combating forces that seek to terminate what few liberties and rights remain and threaten the viability of life itself. Thank you.